The station had always been a hub of quiet activity, tucked away in the forgotten reaches of the outer galaxy. To the average observer, it was just another way station for weary travelers, flickering neon signs advertising fuel, food, and lodging, accompanied by the faint hum of poorly maintained docking equipment. But to Commander Lyra Callan, it was a carefully chosen hiding spot, the last place anyone would expect to find the runaway scientist and her unusual companion. Lyra's sharp eyes scanned the bustling promenade, noting the faces of traders, smugglers, and a few off-world diplomats trying to blend into the chaos. It was the perfect mix of anonymity and danger. Seated across from her in the booth of a dingy cafe was Bax, a towering creature with metallic, chitinous skin and eyes that seemed to refract light into 1,000 tiny rainbows. Bax had been her partner for nearly a year now, ever since she had rescued him from the labs of Vorcorp, the sprawling megacorporation that had made its fortune on genetic modifications and bioengineering. Bax wasn't just an experiment gone wrong, he was an experiment gone right, a living embodiment of Vorcorp's ambitions to merge biological and technological life. And now, he was as much a fugitive as she was. "Do you think they've tracked us this far?" Lyra asked, her voice low but tinged with tension. Her fingers toyed with the edge of her datapad, which displayed a looping news broadcast about an explosion at a Vorcorp research facility, an explosion she had set to cover their escape. Bax tilted his head, a gesture that Lyra had come to recognize as thoughtful. "Unlikely. Their pursuit patterns suggest they're still searching the core worlds." However, he added, his voice a deep, resonant hum, "the probability of detection increases exponentially with each day we remain stationary." Before Lyra could respond, the cafe's holoscreen flickered, and an emergency broadcast replaced the usual loop of galactic stock reports. A news anchor with too perfect hair and a forced smile began speaking. "Authorities continue their search for Dr. Lyra Callan, the rogue scientist responsible for the catastrophic incident at Vorcorp Central. She is believed to be traveling with an unidentified alien entity considered extremely dangerous. Citizens are advised to report any suspicious activity immediately." The image that followed was a grainy but unmistakable photo of Lyra, her features hardened into a mask of defiance. Bax's distorted silhouette loomed in the background, making him look more monstrous than ever. "Well, that's flattering," Lyra muttered, leaning back in her seat. She glanced at Bax, who had turned his reflective eyes toward the screen. "Looks like we're officially famous." "Notoriety complicates our objective," Bax said matter-of-factly. Lyra sighed. "Yeah, well, it's hard to stay under the radar when you're lugging around a 7-foot-tall alien who looks like he could eat a starship." "I assure you," Bax replied, his tone utterly sincere, "I have no interest in consuming starships." Before Lyra could respond, a shadow fell over their table. She looked up to see a tall man dressed in the uniform of a station enforcer, his badge gleaming under the cafe's dim lights. His face was carved with suspicion, and his hand rested on the hilt of a stun baton. "You two seem out of place," the enforcer said, his gaze flicking between Lyra and Bax. Lyra forced a smile, the kind she hoped said "I'm harmless" instead of "I'm lying through my teeth." "Just passing through," she said lightly. "We're merchants." The enforcer's eyes narrowed. "Merchants, huh? What are you trading?" "Rare textiles," Bax interjected, his deep voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "Handwoven from the fibers of the Nebulan swarm. Highly sought after in the outer colonies." Lyra blinked, momentarily stunned by Bax's improvisation. The enforcer, however, seemed less convinced. His hand tightened on the baton as he leaned in closer. "You know, there's been talk of fugitives matching your description. Dangerous types. Wouldn't happen to be you, would it?" Lyra's mind raced, calculating her options. She could try to talk her way out of this, but the enforcer's growing suspicion made that seem unlikely. Running wasn't much better, the station was crawling with security, and she doubted they'd make it far. That left only one option. "Bax," she said calmly, "I think it's time for Plan B." The enforcer barely had time to react before Bax moved. Despite his size, he was astonishingly fast. In one fluid motion, he He grabbed the edge of the table and flipped it upward, sending the enforcer stumbling backward. The cafe erupted into chaos as patrons screamed and scrambled for cover. Lyra ducked low, grabbing her bag and bolting for the exit with Bax close behind. As they sprinted through the station's crowded corridors, alarms began to blare, and automated announcements warned of a security breach. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest, not just from exertion but from the crushing weight of the stakes. If they were caught, it wouldn't just mean imprisonment. Vorcorp wouldn't let them live long enough to stand trial. They reached the docking bay just as a squad of enforcers rounded the corner behind them. Lyra swore under her breath as she fumbled with her datapad, trying to override the lock on the nearest ship. It wasn't theirs, but at this point, stealing a vessel seemed like a minor offense compared to their other crimes. "Hurry," Bax urged, his eyes fixed on the approaching enforcers. He stepped forward, placing himself between Lyra and their pursuers. The enforcers opened fire, their stun rounds crackling through the air. Bax raised one massive arm, and the metallic plates of his skin shifted, forming a shield that absorbed the brunt of the attack. Lyra spared a glance over her shoulder, marveling at the way Bax's body adapted instinctively to protect him. It was a reminder of just how extraordinary, and dangerous, he truly was. "Got it!" Lyra shouted as the ship's hatch hissed open. She grabbed Bax's arm and pulled him inside, slamming the hatch shut behind them. The cockpit was a cramped, outdated mess of buttons and levers, but it would have to do. Lyra slid into the pilot's seat and began powering up the engines while Bax stood guard at the hatch. The ship shuddered as it lifted off the ground, and Lyra guided it toward the docking bay's exit. "We've got company," Bax said, his voice calm despite the chaos. Lyra glanced at the sensors and saw a squadron of security drones closing in fast. "Hang on," she said, gripping the controls tightly. With a sharp twist of the yoke, she sent the ship into a steep climb, weaving between the station's towering structures. The drones pursued relentlessly, their weapons lighting up the void with bursts of energy. "They're not going to let us go," Bax observed, bracing himself against the wall as the ship rocked violently. "They don't have to," Lyra replied through gritted teeth. "We just need to make it to the jump point." The ship's engines groaned in protest as Lyra pushed them to their limits. Alarms blared, warning of overheating systems and depleted shields, but she ignored them. The jump point loomed ahead, a swirling vortex of light that marked the boundary between real space and hyperspace. If they could reach it, they'd be free, at least for now. The drones closed in, their weapons locking onto the ship's engines. Lyra's fingers flew over the controls, rerouting power to the rear shields. "Almost there," she muttered. A sudden impact jolted the ship, and warning lights flared across the console. One of the drones had managed to land a direct hit, and the engines were failing. Lyra's heart sank as the ship began to lose speed. "Bax, I need you to do something crazy," she said, her voice tight with urgency. Bax didn't hesitate. "Specify." "The manual override on the aft thrusters. It's outside the ship. You'll have to spacewalk." Bax nodded once. "Understood." Before she could second-guess her plan, Bax was gone, moving with purpose toward the airlock. Lyra held her breath as she watched him through the external cameras, his massive form navigating the ship's hull with practiced ease. The drones continued their assault, but Bax seemed unfazed, his chitinous armor deflecting most of the damage. Seconds stretched into an eternity as Bax reached the override and activated the thrusters manually. The ship surged forward, propelled by a burst of raw power. Lyra didn't wait for him to return before engaging the jump drive. The swirling vortex enveloped the ship, and in an instant, they were gone, leaving the drones and the station far behind. When Bax finally re-entered the cabin, his metallic skin scorched and battered, Lyra let out a shaky laugh. "Remind me to never doubt you again," she said. Bax tilted his head, the faintest hint of amusement in his voice. "I will add it to your list of reminders."